Hey, what's going on YouTube? My name is Zora and welcome back to a brand new video on the channel. In this video today, I'm going to be doing something a little bit different. I'm going to be providing some feedback on the 10.2 tier set for Guardian Druid that's coming out in the next raid tier, Amirdrassil. Now, for some context on this, I had previously made a different video where I actually talked about the tier set in quite a lot of detail. I went over how the tier set worked, I compared it to our Season 2 tier set, I talked about the strengths and weaknesses of the tier set, and also gave my opinion as to why I thought the set was both good and bad. However, as mentioned, last night on the 17th of October, we did receive some much needed tier tuning, and that meant that my video was made obsolete. I never ended up posting the video, so I thought today I would just re-record some of those points with now the new updated values. So the first thing to talk about in this video then is, what does our 10.2 tier set actually do, how does it work, and what are we gaining from it? The tier set revolves entirely around an ability called Rage of the Sleeper. Rage of the Sleeper, or ROTS for short, which I'm going to call it in this video, was originally our artifact ability in Legion and has since become a talent in Dragonflight. The ability is a core part of our toolkit as a Guardian Druid and is a talent that we pick in almost every scenario. It provides us with some fantastic benefits too, such as 25% damage reduction, 25% additional leech, a 15% damage buff, and it also makes us reflect a portion of all damage we take back at our attacker. It's honestly a very strong cooldown. So now that I've talked about what Rage of the Sleeper is, how does our tier set interact with it? Our tier set revolves entirely around this ability as mentioned. The 2 set makes it so all rage we spend during our ROTS window is being contributed to a shield that, when ROTS expires, we gain for 45 seconds or until depleted. The shield that we gain absorbs 25% of all damage we take. Then, the 4 set bonus makes it so when we spend 40 rage in our Rage of the Sleeper window, we extend the duration of the buff by 1 second up to a total of 5 seconds. This takes the buff from a 10-second buff to a 15-second buff. It then also makes the absorb we gain from the 2-piece, by spending rage, reflect damage back at our attacker just like ROTS does itself. This buff is called Blazing Thorns. So now that I've gone over what the tier set does, how does it actually work? So essentially, the game plan when wearing this new tier set is to spend as much rage in the ROTS window as possible. We want to make sure that we're extending our ROTS from 10 to 15 seconds, which is done by spending rage, and on top of that, all rage we spend during the ROTS buff is contributing to the new shield called Blazing Thorns. So essentially, the more rage that we spend, the bigger the absorb becomes. Now, with that in mind, how do we calculate how much absorb we should be gaining for every rage spent? So Blizzard have given us a calculation to work out the value that we can expect to see from the Blazing Thorns shield, and it's all based on our attack power values. The sum is a modifier that we can times with our total attack power to determine how much absorb value we will gain for every 20 rage that we spend. Now initially, the modifier was 2.2. This means that you would gain a shield equal to 2.2 times your total attack power for every 20 rage that you spent inside ROTS. After recent tuning, however, this has now been tripled and our new modifier is 6.6 times our attack power. This is triple the value and is a very significant increase. Okay, so to provide some context on those numbers and to show you what the calculation looks like, I'm going to be using my attack power value from retail to keep things nice and simple. So on retail right now, I have a total of 9,775 attack power in full mythic gear. Now this is the number that I want to times by the provided modifier, and that then works out the absorb amount that I can expect every 20 rage spent during a Rage of the Sleeper window. So firstly, looking at the previous non-buff modifier from PTR, we were originally timesing our AP value by 2.2, which gave me, with my current value, a total of 21,505. This meant that if I was an Incarn and ROTS and managed to use 10 mauls costing 20 rage each, my total Blazing Thorns shield would be a 215,000 absorb. Now this is honestly extremely low, and this was one of the major flaws of the tier set on the first iteration of PTR. Now, however, we're timesing the AP value by 6.6 instead of 2.2 as mentioned, and this is triple the original value. So again, using my live AP value, instead of a 21,505 shield per 20 rage spent, I would be gaining a shield of 64,515. So in the same scenario where I'm in Incarn and ROTS together, I can expect a total shield of roughly 645,000. This is a significant increase. So how does the Blazing Thorns absorb actually work? So the Blazing Thorns shield absorbs 25% of all damage that we take, and the remaining damage is then either dealt to us directly or is distributed between the other absorbs that we also have active at that time. This means that if I have a Blazing Thorns shield active and I take a hit for 1 million, the Blazing Thorns shield will absorb 250,000 damage of that hit, and the remaining damage is then dealt directly to me. This is also important to mention for the damage portion of the set, as the damage dealt through the shield is a reflect. This means that any direct damage that we take that depletes the shield is then reflected back at the attacker. Now initially, this set was being overridden by other absorbs, which made it extremely hard to deplete. Luckily though, in the most recent PTR change, Blizzard have changed the priority of the Blazing Thorns absorb to always be first in the list. Now this works similar to Ignore Pain, and this means that if you have something like an Ursoc's Fury shield alongside the tierset shield, the tierset shield will always deplete first and take priority before anything else. This was definitely a nice change and a much needed one, and it's great to see the set now working like this. So what are the overall benefits of our new tierset in 10.2? So firstly, as it stands right now, the absorb that you're receiving is going to be fairly substantial. Based on the calculation discussed earlier on in the video, we're going to be expecting a shield of around 700,000 next patch, as we're going to be gaining around 1.5 to 2k AP from the jump in eye level going from Mythic Season 2 gear to Mythic Season 3 gear. Additionally to that, because of the fact that it only absorbs 25% of the damage that we take, you'll need to take a total of around 2.8 to 3 million damage to fully deplete the shield, and that's not an easy task if you're still playing properly and are continuing to mitigate and use defensive cooldowns. This means that the shield isn't going to fall off too quickly with normal gameplay, as the value is so large, so you'll definitely be gaining good value from it. Now secondly to this, the Blazing Thorns shield is a lovely addition to our toolkit, and it creates breathing room for our remaining defensive cooldowns. Bear does have some defensives with extremely short cooldowns such as Bark and Rots, but even then we can only cycle cooldowns for so long. However, having that large absorb proc at the end of Rots gives you an extra layer of defensive benefit, which definitely fleshes out our toolkit and really fills in the gaps in our cooldowns nicely. It fills in positions where we'd otherwise have to layer Iron Furs or call for externals. Now despite the set having some major positive benefits, let's talk about some of the negatives. First and foremost, I want to talk about one of our procs called Tooth and Claw. TNC, for short, is a talent that Bear has which procs from our auto attacks. It's a buff that makes our next Maul or Raise free to use, it increases the damage dealt by 40%, and it also makes the target deal 15% less damage to us for 6 seconds after being consumed. TNC is a core part of our rotation and breakdown and is one of the main reasons why Wind Fury Totem for Guardian Druid is so prominent. However, going into 10.2, if we use Maul or Raise with a TNC proc during our Rots window, those abilities do not contribute to either the extension of Rots or to the absorb shield that we gain when Rots expires. In my opinion, this is the first and foremost biggest issue with this set. Losing Rots extensions and shield values because your TNC procs don't contribute feels absolutely awful, and I believe that this is a vital change that really needs to happen to make the set feel more fluid to play. The next point I want to talk about is the fact that when the Blazing Thorns shield expires, if it does not get fully consumed, our damage is lost and does not proc. As an example, right now on the PTR, if you gain an absorb of 700k but only deplete down 500k of it, if it then expires with 200k remaining, that damage is not dealt and does not proc, and it instead just disappears. Now this is incredibly frustrating, and I feel like this definitely needs to be changed. In certain lower difficulty scenarios such as heroic raiding, lower keystones, or even on earlier mythic bosses, there are definitely going to be scenarios and times where you don't fully deplete the shield and damage is lost. Additionally, this issue also means that the more gear we get throughout the tier, the worse the set technically becomes. This is because having higher item level and more stats is going to provide us with a larger defensive benefit, meaning as the tier goes on, it's going to become increasingly more difficult to proc and deplete the shield fully. Now there are definitely ways around this where you can take naked melee swings with no defensives or mitigation up, and you can let your Iron Fur fall off on purpose, though personally I don't think this feels very intuitive and I would like to see this changed. Blizzard absolutely need to add a failsafe to this where if the absorb isn't fully consumed, it explodes at the end, dealing the remaining damage as an AoE as it expires. Now the third and penultimate criticism that I want to give this tier set is that currently from PTR testing, it does look like AoE abilities do eat through the shield's absorb, but they don't currently reflect damage. In certain scenarios and on a few specific bosses, if there are large amounts of AoE coming in, then this could be a major issue for us, as all of that AoE will be eating into the Blazing Thorns absorb, making us lose large amounts of damage. And finally, the last point is a personal point of mine, but I do feel like the set could potentially benefit from having one additional element or buff that is persistent at all times. Right now on the PTR, when Rots is on cooldown, if our Blazing Thorns shield is fully depleted, we just feel like a worse version of Guardian Druid in Season 2. I would love to see Blizzard implement something that provides the tier set with an extra buff just to make the 10.2 tier set feel better to play. Now overall, I do realise that this isn't a necessary change. Lots of people I've spoken to have disagreed with this point, as the general aim of the tier set seems to be to keep the Blazing Thorns shield active for pretty much the entire duration between your 1 minute Rots cooldown windows. However, for me, this is still something that would make the tier set feel much nicer to use and play with. So to conclude and summarise this video, what are my wants for the 10.2 tier set moving forward, and what are my thoughts on the set overall? Now initially on the PTR, the set felt awful to play with honestly, as there were a handful of issues with the set. Though more than anything however, it just felt bad to use because of the poor number tuning. The set requires a fairly large setup and it felt awful when the result was so minimal. Though after some recent tuning that the tier set has received, it feels a lot better to use, and it isn't anywhere near as bad as it was in the earlier versions of the 10.2 PTR. Despite that though, I do still believe that Tooth and Claw Mauls and Razors should definitely contribute to the extension of Rots and to the Blazing Thorns Absorb. I also think that the damage element needs some tweaking regarding AoE abilities, and I do also think that the shield should explode, dealing the remaining stored damage when it expires if it can't be depleted down fully. Now another idea that's been thrown around a lot recently is to make the Blazing Thorns damage explode when the buff is cancelled. This would enable us to use a cancel or a macro to actively proc the AoE on demand whenever we wanted it. Now I do understand that this change is unlikely to happen, as Blizzard really aren't major fans of cancel aura gameplay, though personally for me however, I do believe that this change could create some really interesting gameplay options where you could be heavily rewarded for min-maxing the explosion to snipe moments of AoE. I also believe that this change could make the set a lot more fun to use and play with. Overall though, the set is in a much better state than it was when the 10.2 PTR first went live. Is it perfect? Absolutely not, and I do hope that Blizzard continue to tweak and fix certain aspects of the set before the tier goes live. Though overall, all things considered, it is really nice to see that our set's been buffed so significantly, and it's great to see that Blizzard have been actively tuning and changing all tier sets so frequently during this PTR cycle. So with that in mind guys, I hope their tier tuning continues, and I've got my fingers firmly crossed that we'll see some more positive changes to our tier set in the future. And finally, if our tier set receives any future updates to either number tuning or even just how it plays, I will definitely be making more videos talking about the changes on the channel, so please consider subscribing to not miss out on them. Though, thank you all for watching this video. I know it's been a bit of a ramble today, but I appreciate you taking the time to watch it nonetheless. But otherwise guys, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.